America faces the possibility of either a government shutdown or a bloated omnibus spending bill heading into Christmas. A new survey finds a staggering increase in mysterious blood clots. And Governor Gavin Newsom tries to penalize California's only electric vehicle manufacturer, that's Tesla. We'll have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Tuesday, December 17th. This morning, Representative Chip Roy bashed the continuing resolution that could prevent the government from shutting down this week if Congress can pass it. Watch.
Swamp's going to swamp, right? 1,400 pages. Still haven't seen the text. Multiple subject matters. Important healthcare legislation in the context of extenders piled on the back of a 3-month CR with about $110 billion unpaid for, $25 billion in healthcare policy, half of which is fake pay for, being sold that is pay for because they're gimmicks and shuffling around the decks. Things like E15, which we didn't even have a full debate on. This is not the way to do business, right? And so, we've said we'd do something different. Since we've been given the majority again, we're adding $330 billion in literally totally unpaid for additional deficit spending just since November 5th in 45 days. I don't see how that's doing what we're supposed to be doing.
All right, now let's go all the way back to September when Speaker Johnson told us this wouldn't happen.
The leader just noted we have broken the Christmas omni, and I have no intention of going back to that terrible tradition. So there won't be a Christmas omnibus. As somebody asked me in the hallway a little while ago, will there be many buses? We don't want any buses. We're not going to do any buses, okay? We'll deal with that in the lame duck, and I'm going to plead, I'm going to urge the Senate to do their job.
No buses. I don't know. He might want to take that back. Here to break it all down for us is Matthew Peterson. He's the editor-in-chief of Blaze News, and Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford. So, Chris, I look at this, and some Republicans are out there calling the CR garbage and a dumpster fire right now. So what kind of mess do we have going on in the swamp right now?
You've got business as usual going on in the swamp right now. And as annoying as Mike Johnson can sometimes be, he's not actually like a bad player in this. He's just someone who he can't find someone in Washington, D.C. who he's not going to make a promise to. He says, he tells everyone everywhere that he'll give them everything. And what ends up happening is he disappoints basically everyone everywhere on everything, because it's a lot more difficult than that. Now he's stuck between a couple of different hard places. They've got a deadline, which for whatever reason, like Alzheimer's patients, every year seems to surprise the Congress. The United States government is always going to run out of money. You know this months and months in advance, sometimes a whole year in advance, and it always ends up with a last-minute scramble as they try to make this promise or that promise. Now you've got the agricultural Republicans who are looking for different kinds of relief for farmers who have been struggling. They're an important group to mollify. They were actually hit pretty hard by Donald Trump's trade wars in the past with Canada and Mexico. They're probably going to be hit hard by those sorts of things again. So there's someone to work with. Then you end up with ethanol handouts, E15, like we were just talking about, which is essentially a green energy subsidy now being backed by the GOP because it helps out the farmers. You can see how it gets complicated. You also had promises from the speaker about a different process this time, including the different committee chairmen. Well, that hasn't happened. It's not just conservatives like Chip Roy who are mad. You've got much more moderate or mainstream Republicans, like chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Jason Smith, who are angry that they haven't been included. It's essentially in that negotiating room for Republicans, Mike Johnson and his chief, Dan Ziegler. Everyone else seems to be boxed out. And even now, you still haven't gotten the text. I actually think it'll probably drop later tonight. They have to get to that 72-hour window, or really they don't, or they get a shutdown. And then everyone's all freaked out about exactly what a shutdown is. Well, honestly, the government shuts down most weekends. You don't get a paycheck on the weekends. You don't get a Social Security check on the weekends. A lot of government offices aren't open on the weekends. So even if it does go past the deadline, it really doesn't matter as long as they fix it by Sunday. You'll get the back pay, you'll get this or that. And honestly, if Republicans are willing to fight, which they're clearly not on this, then you could shut down the government for most of the Christmas holiday. People are not actually getting anything that they really need. A lot of the offices are closed. The paychecks could wait an extra couple days and then reopen when they actually have both the House and the Senate and the presidency in January. But I don't see any appetite for that kind of fight coming down the pike.
Well, before we let the Republicans off the hook, right, it kind of felt like a little deja vu to me earlier today, Bedford, because I had a headline here from March. It says, conservatives furious at Johnson for waiving the GOP's 72-hour rule on a $1.2 trillion government funding bill. And he blamed the White House for the rush on the spending package. Now, it is the Christmas season. So hear me out, right? Somebody in D.C., maybe some staffer out there can go buy one of those very large calendars that take up the whole desk, and maybe they can fill it out ahead of time with key dates before we get here. And then we know when the 72 hours is about to approach, and we don't have to have these fights, Peterson.
Yeah, well, I mean, so what we do know about the calendar, right, is Friday, is the deadline Chris already is talking about. So what do you think happens? What's your best guess, Chris, in terms of how this goes down? I mean, it seems like Democrats are more okay with it than Republicans right now. So does this just...
They get their way.
Yeah, so does this just, go through and we're done?
Well, members are already starting to rebook their flights. People who are trying to get out of town Friday night are starting to rebook and expecting that they're going to be here probably until Saturday at least. I mean, if the text drops tonight, you have 72 hours where it gets to go then to passage. If they try to keep that rule, maybe the House passes it late on Friday night, but then it still has to go through the United States Senate. Now, as far as we can tell, the Senate is involved in these negotiations. It seems to be what they call the four corners. You got Hakeem Jeffries for the House Democrats with Johnson for the House Republicans, with also Schumer and Thune for the Senate and the Senate Republicans and Democrats who are negotiating this. So if that works and that goes, then it should be fairly quick passage by the Senate. But right now, congressmen are already starting to remake their weekend plans. I don't expect, if there's a shutdown, I don't think it lasts more than 24 to 48 hours. I think that they don't have the appetite for it. Everyone just wants to start the new year. Everybody just wants to kick it off and get to January and go home for Christmas. And it's kind of like what they do every year. You could actually probably get some real concessions from the federal government. You could actually, if you had a speaker or a majority leader in the Senate who was willing to push it to the limit and tell members, if you don't break on this, then you're not going home for Christmas, you could probably get some real change. But then again, if anybody in D.C. worked as hard as they pretended to work, you could get real change, and they don't.
Well, we've been talking about Donald Trump and his legal victories. There's one that's kind of on hold right now. Judge Juan Marchand ruled that Donald Trump's conviction in the Stormy Daniels hush money case should not be thrown out, despite the Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. So how is this going to impact his case?
It's all so much up in the air as it comes down to the authorities with him actually as a sitting president. I would say that this is just probably going to end up as another example of Democrats thinking, oh, they finally got him. The lawfare is finally going to work. Now he's going to prison. That's completely insane. They push a constitutional crisis. They're still going to go after Trump. But I still think at this moment, it's a lot of demoralization on the American left. The lawfare didn't work. The politics of it didn't work. The J6 investigations, fiasco, and imprisonments didn't work, at least not in the president. It's hurt a lot of innocent people and a lot of folks along the way. I don't think that this is going to be their silver bullet to finally take him down.
Well, before we take our leave with you, 60 seconds, we got to throw this over to you. Electoral College. I love to talk about it because the founders, it's one of the only things, all the founders walked away from the Constitution after they ratified it thinking, I didn't get what I wanted. But they were all almost uniformly proud of the Electoral College as a way to solve the problem of, pure democratic vote. This has been an issue our entire lives. It will continue to be. But as you know, over in the Senate, the Democrats have introduced legislation to end the Electoral College, even though Donald Trump won both the Electoral College, of course, and the popular vote. So do you anticipate this bill will get any momentum? Is this just for show, or is this serious?
Well, I think it's a potentially serious threat in the long term, but not this round. We have such terrible civics education in the country that there's a lot of folks out there who don't even
Yeah,
realize that the founders were
most.
properly and correctly afraid of mob rule, of rule by a simple majority over the entire country. So this is a bill essentially to abolish electoral college, which means it's a bill to let the United States be ruled by the decisions of Manhattan and New York City voters and California voters combined. Those are the people who would be in charge of who the president of the United States is. The founders set up a bunch of different guards against us, including, and one of the reasons for it, as you alluded to just there, Matt, and that excellent walk back, was that there was supposed to be a jealousy for the power between the different states that would want to protect their own power against each other, and make sure that New York didn't rule over Virginia, Virginia didn't rule over South Carolina, Massachusetts didn't rule over Rhode Island. Uh, that was kind of changed a little bit with the progressive revolts to try and put popularly elected senators in. Now you've got that coming through, and this would be the last step. But at the end of the day, it would completely disenfranchise the voters of New Mexico, South Dakota, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, all these other different states. It's an important system. It's under threat, and honestly, it stinks to say it, but the reality, the silver bullet here is education.
Yeah, well, Chris, I can't wait to see what they sneak into the CR. I'm sure that you're going to break it all down for us tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'll see you then.
Matt, before we even get on with this show, at some point, I feel like we're going to be breaking down the Federalist Papers, just the way that the show is going.
We have to, because it's ripped from today's headlines. I mean,
it is.
Every day you have someone saying we need to get rid of this part of the Constitution, right? And that means that we have to explain why these things exist. The other thing is no one's been taught, as Chris is saying, the real problem is no one's been taught the reason for any of this stuff. So we're the blind leading the blind, we're, arrogant children playing in the ruins of a once great civilization. So we got to talk about that once great civilization if we're going to bring it back.
Well, maybe this will help, because when we come back, we'll give you a sneak peek at the future of the Republican Party. Stay tuned. When you open a gold IRA with Birch Gold Group, you can get free silver coins shipped directly to your home. That's right. It's the most wonderful time of the year, and the time when Birch Gold gives away a free silver American Eagle coin for every $5,000 purchased. And the best part is you don't have to pay a penny out of pocket. By December 20th, simply convert an existing IRA or 401k into a tax-sheltered IRA in precious metals, and Birch Gold will send you your free silver coins directly to your home. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Why do I need to diversify in gold? My guy's going to be heading to DC. Things are looking pretty good. But, the administration is trying to put a dent into a $36 trillion national debt. And doing that in 4 years is like putting a mouse in front of a freight train and expecting it to stop. But we can't even afford right now to pay the interest on the debt, let alone the principal. So better to be safe than sorry, and take action now to protect your savings. Text the word Gill to 989898 for your free info kit on gold and to claim your eligibility on free silver with your purchase from Birch Gold. But you must do this by December 20th. Again, text Gill to the number 989898. Last week, incoming Texas Congressman Brandon Gill came on the show and explained how he would measure his success on Capitol Hill. Take a look.
My biggest priority is going to be on the border. I think in some ways I could measure my personal success numerically, and it's based on the number of illegal aliens that get deported over the next 2 years in my first Congress. That's how I'm going to measure success.
And while speaking at the New York Young Republican Club Gala, Gill explained why he has no interest in working with his soon-to-be Democratic colleagues.
I don't know about y'all, but I have no interest in bipartisanship after what they've done to our country. If Democrats want to vote for our bills, then they can do that. But there are bills because we have a mandate now.
I am so energized, and here to break it all down for us is Kingsley Wilson. She runs the digital media and strategic communications for the Center for Renewing America. So Kingsley, thanks so much for joining the show. And I want to know, is this the kind of energy that we're going to see from the new MAGA representatives heading to DC?
I think 100%. You could hear the crowd there. They were just as energized as you were listening to that clip. I was in the crowd that evening, and I can tell you the energy was palpable. It was off the charts. Congressman Gill is going to be a fantastic representative, not just for Texans, but I think for the entire country and for young conservatives in particular. He's freshman class president. He's got a lot of MAGA youthful spirit, and he's really going to focus on the issues that matter. In D.C., here in the swamp, when you hear bipartisanship, that is uniparty talking code for uniparty rule and for fighting for DC interests instead of your interests. For too long, Republicans on the campaign trail, they've talked, MAGA Republican talkers, but then they've stabbed their own constituents in the back when they get to Washington, D.C. Brandon Gill is someone who's going to pull back that curtain on the DC cartel and all their dirty dealings, and he is going to fight for the American people. We can't have 4 more years of bipartisanship for the sake of bipartisanship. Congressman-elect Gill is absolutely correct. We have a mandate from the American people. On November 5th, we won the Electoral College and we won the popular vote. The American people are clamoring for the Trump agenda. And if we don't get that done, we would be subverting the will of the American people. So I hope to see all Republicans in Congress bring that same spirit that Congressman Gill did, just as he spoke to the New York Young Republicans there.
Kingsley, I couldn't agree more about some of this. I mean, what's really interesting is that when they say bipartisanship, there's getting things done because you have to get things done, and there's another side and you have to confront it and wrangle and wrestle and argue. And then there's like the good feeling that establishment types seem to get from, kowtowing to the other side. And oh, good, I got a pat in the head from my enemies. It's really disgusting, when you think about it. But let's think about this. So two sort of objections or questions from the cynical side of the crowd. One would be, okay, you guys, you all love Brandon. He was on the show when he said that about his measure of success. I almost you dropped some language in support of him that I wouldn't normally be tempted to drop on a show. It was so amazing. But is he really representative of the people coming in first? Does he represent this wave? And then second, what about the obvious objection of, every, crusty establishment type throughout the country, which is like, that sounds really good, but, this is just immaturity and you're going to have to be bipartisan if you want to get things done?
I've already, to your latter point there, I think we've already started to see this with President Trump's cabinet picks, right? We saw a little bit of hesitation from senators. They weren't sure about some of these folks. We heard, inexperience thrown around, which really just means that, they're not your typical Beltway elites, which the American people and the average voter, I think, finds rather refreshing. But to the senators and lobbyists here in D.C., that's cause for alarm. But I think, even they have come around and really started to rally behind these individuals that President Trump has selected because they're feeling the heat from their constituents. So I think if, senators and congressmen don't kind of adopt this mentality that Congressman Gill was really exemplifying there, they're going to get lit up by their constituents and their voters are going to be mad. Because if Trump has done anything for the Republican Party, I think he has taught them who is in charge, right? You don't work for the DC special interests. You don't work for lobbyists or big corporations like Boeing. You work for the American people. And that, at the end of the day, is what President Trump is fighting for, a working class party that serves those outside the Beltway American families who are truly the backbone of this entire nation and this entire economy. So I think we're going to see a lot more people adopt Congressman Gill's approach, because if they don't, they're going to have hell to pay. That is absolutely for certain.
We certainly hope that's the case. But when they do eventually have to go over to the other side of the aisle, we didn't know if we were going to see the youth, or we'll just call it experience, over there in D.C. because AOC lost her bid to become the ranking member of the House Oversight Committee to her opponent, Congressman Jerry Connolly. So what does this say now about the direction that the Democrats want to go in?
I think the Democrat Party is really kind of going to have an internal crisis that they're going to have to work out in these next few months, right? They were so out of touch with the average voter. They were, not going on the types of podcasts that President Trump was on the campaign trail, for instance. and they were just unable to kind of break through. They focused on issues like transgender care for illegals and for prison inmates. Well, President Trump was out there talking about ending endless wars, gas prices, affordable groceries, securing the border, deporting illegals who break our laws. Those were the issues that resonated with voters. And I think Democrats are really kind of going into apoplexy. They're trying to figure out which way to turn. We saw Jen Psaki just days after the election saying they should actually double down on the transgender just madness and rhetoric. So I think we're going to see a push and pull here between more, establishment Democrats and then, some of the more radical fringe elements of their party, like AOC. There's going to be a blood battle between these two camps. And I certainly hope to see the radicals win out because I think they're absolutely easier for us to beat in years to come.
So let's talk about Jasmine Crockett. The voters overall, chose Trump over Harris, obviously, for economic and immigration policies, many other reasons. But this woman out of Texas has a different explanation. Jill and I were talking about this yesterday. You've seen this, right? She claims that minorities voted for Donald Trump because of, quote, a slave mentality in an interview with Vanity Fair. At first, Trump was literally Hitler, right? We heard that every day for a long time, many years. And now he won because of the slave mentality. Help us make sense of this. I mean, I thought maybe some of this stuff would go away, but maybe it's coming back. I mean, what do you think?
I think it's, hard to teach an old dog new tricks. We're going to see Democrats just continue to rely on this progressive worldview that they have pushed on the American public and tried to indoctrinate basically in every institution and facet of government, right? They control the mainstream media. They control different colleges and universities, and they've been pushing this so aggressively. But what we saw on November 5th was a wholesale rejection of all of this madness. I think your average person is so sick and tired of CRT and DEI. They want to go back to the American ideal of meritocracy, and they want people to be judged based on the content of their character instead of the color of their skin. And they want to uplift people and promote people who are actually talented and who are deserving of such jobs, right? Not just hiring someone because they're a woman or because they're gay. That's absolutely ridiculous. So it's offensive to see Democrats, I think, put people into these boxes and say that just because someone is, Hispanic or African American, they can't support President Trump. In fact, I think we saw a large coalition of minority Americans supporting President Trump. He did that fantastic rally in the Bronx where, Americans from all walks of life came out in support of him. He is a president who's truly going to be a uniter and is going to fight for all Americans, right? A rising tide lifts all boats. And I think the next 4 years of President Trump's successes are going to uplift and embolden all Americans and truly make their lives great again. So I'm excited to see that. This Jasmine Crockett stuff is just as noisy as when she's, screeching and howling in the Oversight Committee hearings. It's just noise, not signal. We don't need to pay any heed to it.
Yeah, and Kingsley, when you're talking, it just made me think of how Trump and Vance would talk about the American dream and bringing it back. And it's just like, hey, common sense is going to be here to stay. Kingsley, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Matthew, I just go back to Brandon Gill and when he was on the show and just how excited we were in that moment. She said she was there in the crowd on Sunday night and just he's one of those guys that's going to be firing everybody up in the MAGA crowd.
Oh yeah, that New York Young Republicans Club is fire. That everyone associated with that, they're hardcore. But the fact that here they have their Texan right coming in as the hero, saying these things, I think Brandon's going to be with us a long time. He's a very brave guy, and he's saying things that represent whether out there you like it or not. Like this is the face of the incoming Congress to me. Like he really represents the base. You see people like Kingsley. This is a young movement. It's a youth movement. And it's very exciting.
And the Democrats picked the 74-year-old with cancer instead of AOC out there. I don't know. I mean, that's, hey, you do you, like she's saying. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll unpack the mysterious surge in blood clots being witnessed by embalmers. Just ahead. A nuclear blast devastates Los Angeles. It's throwing the nation into chaos. No, it's not reality, but it is in Angel Studios' upcoming film, Homestead. You can see it in theaters December 20th. And there's chaos, and an ex-Green Beret joins a prepper compound. You're going to see all the love growing, all the truth coming together in a united community, because this movie packs that heart-pounding tension with all the moral dilemmas in a story that cuts to the core of what it means to survive. Homestead explores the humanity behind the apocalypse. And you can pre-order your tickets now for a chance to win $300,000 giveaway. It includes one full Bitcoin, a fully furnished tiny home from Box House, and a custom Polaris OHV by Sparks Motos, and everything else that you're going to need to start your own homestead. So pre-order your tickets now for a chance to win. It's angel.com/Jill. That's angel.com/Jill. Since 2021, embalmers have been finding mysterious rubbery clots in corpses, and U.S. Air Force Major and data analyst Thomas Haviland has decided to investigate the emergence of these clots, and he's compiled his findings from 2 worldwide embalmer blood clot surveys, and he joins us now to break it down. So Thomas, thanks so much for joining us. So if you will, just take us through how you got started into these investigations of all the clots.
Well, Jill, I watched that movie Died Suddenly, and at the 13-minute and 15-second mark, an amazing statement was made. An embalmer from the state of Indiana, Mr. Wallace Hooker, was lecturing at an Ohio Embalmers Association conference in Columbus, Ohio, on the 26th of October in 2022, and he was speaking to a room of about 100 embalmers. And he showed them photographs of these unusual white fibrous clots that he'd been removing from his corpses for about the last year. And he asked them, by a show of hands, how many of you are seeing those same white fibrous clots? And he said almost the entire room of 100 embalmers raised their hands yes. He then asked them, well, when did you start seeing them? And they all agreed it was in the middle of 2021, about 6 months after the COVID-19 vaccines rolled out. So I thought that was a very interesting statement. I know there were some problems with the movie, but either that statement was true or false. Either those embalmers raised their hands or they didn't. So then the very next day, after I watched the movie, I contacted the Ohio Embalmers Association myself. I talked to their president, Mr. Dan Becker, their vice president, Mr. Woody Wilson, and their secretary, Mr. David Hicks. And I asked all 3 gentlemen, hey, did you happen to be in the room at the time that those embalmers supposedly raised their hands? Well, none of the 3 gentlemen happened to be in the room at the time. However, Mr. Woody Wilson, who was the vice president and is now the president of the Ohio Embalmers Association, said, Tom, I'm seeing the white fibrous clots too. So right there and then I decided I needed to do a nationwide survey, which I then later on turned into a worldwide survey by including Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK to see just how prevalent these white fibrous clots were.
Thomas, tell us more about that survey and how you collect your data.
Yeah, first of all, I try to keep it as unbiased as possible. I never mentioned the words COVID or COVID vaccine anywhere in the instructions of the survey, nor in the survey questions themselves. I also didn't ask the embalmers any questions they couldn't answer, like how or why the clots are forming. They don't know that. But they can answer the questions, what are you seeing? When did you see it? Where on the body are you finding these clots? And then, of course, how much? What percentage of your corpses contain these phenomena, these white fibrous clots, and another phenomenon called microclotting. So the survey centered around those questions. And then to distribute the survey, I used a good friend of mine who lives in Northern Ohio and is an expert in SurveyMonkey, Miss Laura Kasner. So I developed the questions, we loaded them into SurveyMonkey, and then I used a 2-prong approach to distribute them, Matthew. I sent them in a top-down approach to 50 national, regional, and state funeral director associations around the world, asking them to forward it down to their 100 members, their funeral directors and embalmers, to take the survey. Then I also used a bottom-up approach by sending the survey directly to over 1,700 funeral homes around the world. I looked up the email addresses for over 1,700 funeral homes and sent it to them directly to try to maximize the number of results.
And so tell our audience what you have found in these surveys so far.
Well, in the first survey that I ran in 2022, the main thing from that survey was that 2/3 of the embalmers, 66%, were seeing the white fibrous clots. And the consensus of those embalmers was that the phenomenon did start for them in 2021 after the vaccines rolled out. And then they were seeing them in an average of 30% of their corpses. So this is not a rare phenomenon. These things are prevalent. In my second survey, about the same percentage of embalmers said they were seeing the clots again, the white fibrous clots. We also added another question concerning microclotting, which the embalmers describe as what looks like coffee grounds or dirty blood in the corpses. And they were seeing that phenomenon in about 1 out of every 4 corpses in 2023. So this most recent survey that I ran in 2024, I just completed it this last weekend. And unfortunately, the information, the stats are bad. 83% of the embalmers responding to this year's survey, of the 301 that responded, 250 of them are seeing the white fibrous clots in the year 2024. So this phenomenon is still happening, even though we're well into the past the time of people taking their first vaccines or the years of COVID. So and they're seeing these white fibrous clots in the year 2024 in over 25% of their corpses. It came out to be 27.5% of their corpses seeing these seeing the white fibrous clots. And in terms of the microclotting, the embalmers are seeing about 78% of the embalmers said they're seeing the microclotting in about 22% of their corpses. So unfortunately, these two phenomena are still happening and they're still quite prevalent. Well, however, there's a reluctance for embalmers and funeral director associations to want to talk about it.
Yeah, no, I was going to say we had so many of these news stories, that people would at least be talking about it in the years right after COVID. But the fact that you come to us and say people are still seeing it here in 2024 is very concerning. And I want to know if you think that if there's ever going to be any formal investigation done by some of the people that are actually, in a position to go out there and make the changes.
Good question, Jill. And the last 2 years, when I have my surveys finished in 2022 and 2023, I sent the results immediately to the FDA, CDC, and NIH. Crickets from those organizations. I gotten a tracking number from the FDA for information I've sent to them previously, but I've never been contacted once. And it's a darn shame, isn't it, that a retired Air Force major has to go out and do this on his own, as opposed to these organizations, which should be doing this, taking charge and talking not just to embalmers and funeral directors, but I've been contacted by an endovascular specialist and cardiologist from Jacksonville, Florida, who has admitted to me that he's been pulling these same white fibrous clots out of living people for the last couple of years, which did not surprise me in the embalmers, Jill, because the embalmers, they were picking up bodies that were only an hour or two old and not refrigerated, and they were seeing them riddled with the clots. And they said there's no way these clots could be forming in just the hour or two since the person passed. So we know it was happening in the living and causing strokes and heart attacks. And then I got confirmation from this whistleblower, but he's afraid to come out and talk about it because he's afraid of having his license pulled, his board certifications taken away.
Can you just, for the record, explain what the working hypothesis is for the cause of these clots and how they play into it? Because I think a lot of people actually, they hear this or they see the pictures like, oh, that's disgusting. This is very worrisome. It's very scary. But what's the working hypothesis for why this is the case?
Myself and embalmer Richard Hirschman, who was featured in the movie Died Suddenly, we're working with a team of scientists around the world that are looking at these clots, and they believe that it's a spike protein problem, either from the virus or from the vaccine or from both. And we believe the spike protein is damaging the endothelial lining of the vascular system. And it's also the spike protein and the lipid nanoparticle that delivers the mRNA from the vaccine, we believe is bonding with our natural fibrinogen. Our liver produces a clotting substance protein called fibrinogen, and it's in a liquid form in our plasma. Usually when there's damage done to the vascular system, then that fibrinogen converts into a solid fibrin normally, and it's white in color, and it's used to help platelets aggregate and then clot until the wound is healed and then the clot is broken down. Unfortunately, though, we believe that process is being interrupted, and that fibrinogen is actually has an affinity for the lipid nanoparticles at the moment they open up to release the modified RNA that's inside them. And that becomes phosphorylated, and instead it forms this bizarre polymer of the lipid nanoparticle and the fibrinogen. And then the spike protein that's produced by the vaccine also becomes a player as well, because it gets phosphorylated and then it also has an affinity for our natural fibrinogen. And we've got some scientific proof out there. We've also verified through several tests, including a thioflavin T test, that these basically are made of what's called amyloid protein. The fibrinogen, it's a fancy term for misshaped or misfolded protein. So instead of the fibrinogen, like I said, converting naturally into fibrin, it's being twisted out of shape and instead forming this misfolded protein that then becomes hard for our own natural enzyme plasmin to break down the clots. So then the clots tend to grow and persist.
Yeah, it's so important to keep everybody informed about this. And thank you so much for going out there and doing all of this work that you've done. And please keep us up to date with anything that you have coming forward, Thomas. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jill.
Matthew, I love all of the explanation that he had there, but one of the things that stuck out to me was like, I watched the documentary, and then I took action the next day. I made a phone call the very next day, right? That is powerful in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's been lurking around for a few years, and the more that we directly attack it and know what's going on, the better. And given that the censorship seems to be diminishing, we feel like this is a good time to bring this issue up and explore it. Whether he's right or not, this is something that needs to be explored. And the idea of just asking embalmers the question is a great one.
Yeah, well, don't go anywhere, because when we come back, we'll expose how Gavin Newsom is driving Tesla out of California. First Liberty Institute is the nation's largest legal group dedicated exclusively to defending religious freedom for all Americans. And right now, they're standing up for Dad's Place. It's a small church out in Bryan, Ohio, that serves as a refuge for the needy during the cold nights. And local officials, led by Mayor Carrie Schlade, are waging a relentless battle to shut down the church for over a year. And Pastor Chris Avail, he's been threatened with jail time because he wants to put his faith into practice, and he wants to go out there and help the needy. And First Liberty is fighting back, but they need your help. So sign their petition and tell the Bryan city leaders to stop harassing Pastor Chris and Dad's Place and the vulnerable people that they serve. Together, we can fight back and stop these city leaders from criminalizing compassion. Go to firstliberty.org/Jill to sign the petition and learn how you can help Pastor Chris and Dad's Place fight back against the city of Bryan. It's firstliberty.org/Jill. California Governor Gavin Newsom is at it again, this time targeting Tesla, the very company that helped put electric vehicles on the map. In a stunning move, Newsom's new EV tax credit would exclude Elon Musk's company. So what's behind this plan? Here with more is Lauren Fix, who wrote about this for Blaze.com. So Lauren, why is Newsom trying to single out Tesla here? It's the only American company right now building the electronic vehicles in California.
That is because, as you're probably aware, that Gavin Newsom is not a fan of Elon Musk anymore because he's part of the Trump Doge team, and he doesn't like that because remember the billions of dollars they've gotten to do their fast train that's supposed to go from San Francisco to Los Angeles, that it's never happened. I'm sure he doesn't want that money to disappear that keeps flooding into his country so he can use it, or into his state. It feels like another country, so that he can obviously use it for other things, because it's certainly not going to building a fast, high-speed train that was promised, but we didn't think that was going to happen anyhow.
Yeah, I mean, clearly that relationship is soured, to say the least, as Elon picks up and leaves to Texas, just like myself and so many others have done in the last 4 years. When you look at this, you said in the piece the details would be negotiated out in the legislature. Is this likely to go through all the way? How do you see it playing out?
Well, it's hard to tell with California. We do know for a fact that President Trump plans to, as I put it in my words of my current article, annihilate the EV mandate as well as the $7,500 tax credit. But the one thing he really needs to remove is the California Air Resources Board, which is the one that puts that California waiver in place. And this is how I see it unfolding. At the end of the last term for President Trump, he waited to the end of 4 years to go after the California Air Resources Board, and should have done it right away because it's got to go through the courts. And it's going to most likely going to be a long haul to get that done. But once that's removed, what we gain from that is that all those 17 states that are in lockstep with California and the rest of the country will not have to follow the mandate. If California wants to make a rule, great, have a party. But the fact is, the rest of the country doesn't want to be forced into something they don't want to do, which we've written about and put into the Blaze under the Align section on no RVs. You can't drive anything but an electric car, and just more restrictions and higher costs, which is really what his plan is all along. And this guy wants to run for president, scares the heck out of most of us. But the bottom line is, if he can't have his California Resources Board, then he'll offer it to just anyone that sells in California except Tesla, because obviously he's already moved his home base to Texas, which was a pretty smart move.
Yeah, and Elon Musk, he's a guy who likes to win, right? Donald Trump says you're not going to get tired of winning. Elon is now right there in lockstep with him. So is he going to be fighting back in more ways than just moving to Texas?
Well, I expect that Elon Musk is going to love to see that mandate go away, because if you take away that electric vehicle mandate, that means he has no competition. So no longer does he have to worry about Ford, GM, Toyota, Honda, any of them, Hyundai for that matter, because he will be the main electric vehicle manufacturer, which he is now. He owns about 66% of the market share. He is one of the three one of the three US made car companies. You've got Ford, GM, and Tesla. Stellantis is no longer here. It is based in Belgium, with our tax dollars, mind you, that went to Fiat Chrysler, and then they sold it. And then they sold it again. So now it's Stellantis out of Belgium. So again, we're going to see a lot of changes happening in the marketplace. Not allowing Chinese cars into this country is actually a very good move. But the fact that Elon Musk can control the electric vehicle market, if you want to buy one, you should buy one. If you want to buy one from another brand, it should be available to you. But every brand has said, we take a loss on these vehicles. And if we can sell vehicles we make money on, then we can hire more people and develop better vehicles that consumers want.
It really is crazy when, we live in a supposed democracy and you have the pettiness of these battles, right, influencing millions of people. It cracks me up to no end. The other, of course, I guess I should be used to it. We live in a society in which a lot of these people's moms and dads were also in politics in our democratic blue states. I want to go to something, speaking of legacy, Jaguar. You wrote a piece recently for Blaze News on Jaguar's failed billion-dollar rebrand. We've talked about it on the show before. We all saw the ad. I'm curious, what do you think the effects of this will be? We've talked about how crazy it is that they did this. Do we already see any signs of how this is going to go? And how do you play this out for us into the future? What do you think will happen?
Well, I should give a little background on it for those of you. And I race a Jaguar, so to me this is tears my heart out. And I've owned older Jaguars and newer ones. So in the past, Jaguar was known for racing history, and at one point they got into trouble because the British government decided they wanted to run the auto industry, and so Jaguar ended up selling to a couple of companies and eventually to Ford. Ford sold off Jaguar Land Rover to Tata, which is an Indian car company. Rutan Tata was a genius. He's in the Automotive Hall of Fame. But he passed away about 6 months ago. And Land Rover has really done well with the Defender and the Range Rover Sport, but they also own Jaguar. And instead of using the undercarriages of a Land Rover and putting what we call different hats on it, different bodies, instead they're going to do something completely different. And what really killed me is the marketing person they hired said, we don't want our old customers. I've never heard of that before. If you were a coffee shop and you sold coffee, you decided to add donuts, you wouldn't say, I don't want my coffee customers, I just want my donut customers. You're never going to make it. You have to keep your existing base and add to that. So by making this androgynous, obscure commercial that never showed a car, we waited for it to come to Art Basel, which is out of Miami, to see the vehicle. I waited to see it before I made any commentary. And I was disappointed. It looked like a Chrysler Crossfire married a Chrysler 300 and then bolted an air conditioner on the front and the back. It's obscure. Will it sell? Not at $250,000. It won't, because I don't think those androgynous people are enough of them out there to purchase a $250,000 electric car.
Amen.
It'll make a statement, but I fear for the brand.
It hurts our hearts as well. Lauren Fix, great stuff as always.
Yes. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. We'll be back to wrap up the show right after this. Well, we know we've moved past the presidential election. It's a huge weight off of our shoulders, Matthew. But now everybody, we see the legacy media. They're still trying to sell their lies. And this is the time, really, to join Blaze TV.
Yeah, I mean, when people talk about everyone wants you to subscribe to their podcast or whatever, but this is the time for right-leaning media to take off. We are in a completely new frontier now. The legacy media is done. This is the time for Blaze to rise, and we are, especially with your help.
Yeah, and with Gavin McGinnis, we had him on the show, and he said independent platforms are going to be the way to go. So let's take this next adventure together. If you want to join us, go to blazetv.com/BNT and get $20 off. If you love the show and you support Blaze TV and what it stands for, this is your chance to get more involved in something special. It's blazetv.com/BNT for $20 off. Well, clearly the news of the day is what's happening in D.C. and can they get their act together? Can they pass a CR before this weekend? They have to have 72 hours for the people to read the bill. We're not going with Nancy Pelosi. Sometimes you have to pass the bill before you know what's in the bill deal. No, Speaker Johnson's out here. And as Chris Bedford said, the problem with Speaker Johnson is he makes promises to everyone. So here we are waiting, still eagerly anticipating what kind of garbage, as some of these Republicans on Capitol Hill are saying, is going to be in this bill.
Yeah, look, I would love for it to be the case. I would love for it to be the case that I could trust Mike Johnson. But, you know, I can't. And I think he's going to be in a little bit of trouble on this one because I don't see how exactly he pulls this off in a way where everyone goes, oh, well done.
Right.
But, you know, we'll see.
And the problem is he's the leader. So you kind of have to follow him.
Yeah.
But we do have somebody new coming up. He's the president of the freshman class, Brandon Gill. We talked about him with Kingsley early on the show. And, you know, I thought that the peak for Brandon for at least like the weekend was going to be him coming on our show saying, I'm going to measure my success in the number of people that I get deported in the first 2 years. And then he doubles down,
Yes.
right? He doesn't stop there.
Also, I reject bipartisanship to all the young people at the New York Republican dinner, which is a very based event. And I mean, I kind of see him as the future. I mean, he is the future. He's 30 years old. You know, notice Kingsley's on, like, these are all young people who are engaged, who are in the fight, who are full of passion, and they are belligerent in the best possible way.
And we are going to be hanging out with young people in the fight all weekend.
Yes.
We're going to be going to America Fest down in Phoenix this weekend. We have big guests lined up. We're going to have our show there on Thursday and Friday. And I can't wait to be in a room because if we thought that, you know, like watching Brandon Gill on TV and in front of that audience was exciting, this is an entire weekend of that vibe.
Yeah, look, I mean, Charlie Kirk is very good at what he does, and one of the many things he does is he puts on quite a party, quite an event. I mean, America Fest has really taken over as the the event of the year for as far as these things go for the right. And you know, when I look at it, I'm a cynical person, remember, who's hated Republicans for a long time, even though I have to vote that way every year. But when I'm looking
We're
at
in the same boat.
I was going to like, oh, you know, this is going to be lame. I don't know. I hate these conferences. This isn't going to be incredible. Like Tucker Carlson, a certain person who's in Mar-a-Lago. I mean, there's
Don Jr., Big Don, you know, they've already said they're already confirmed to be going there. So our own Glenn Beth and Allie Beth Stuckey are going to be there, and we're going to be having the show from there. And it's going to be the last couple of episodes that we have for 2024. So you're going to have to get all of that Republican, you know, wishy-washiness, whatever it's going to be, get that out now.
It's going to be great. I mean, this is going to be a great time. I can't wait to go. And, we'll bring it all to you.
Yeah, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of these shows as we are getting ready to wrap up the year. And we'll break it all down for you tomorrow night. Stay tuned, everybody. We'll see you then.